Hey everybody, so it's Dominish and I'm here to give you a little history lesson this evening. So I'm going to tell you about my third great maternal grandfather, Jeremiah Miley Spahr. So he was born in the early 1800s in Warrington Township, York County, Pennsylvania, and he spent most of his life in Warrington Township. If you're not familiar with that area, it's near Gifford-Pinchot State Park in Pennsylvania. He joined the 87th Pennsylvania Civil War Regiment during the Civil War, and unfortunately he got caught up in the Third Battle of Winchester, and most of his battle buddies ended up being killed during that battle. The 87th was basically decimated during the Third Battle of Winchester, so he had to physically walk back with nothing but the clothes on his back, his service rifle, his shoes, and he had to walk all the way back from Winchester to Warrington Township in York County, Pennsylvania. And when he arrived home, he discovered that his horse had been stolen. So again, you have to set the scene that this is during the American Civil War. The Confederates had just come through York County, Pennsylvania, the Battle of Hanover, and they were on their way to what would be known as the Battle of Gettysburg. And when the Confederate troops came through York County, they stole a lot of horses. So horses, when you're in an agricultural society, that is your lifeblood. That's what keeps you going. You can't harvest your crops without horses. You can't get very far distances without your horses because you'd have to walk everywhere. This is before automobiles. And Warrington Township was very rural at the time. This man had just walked back from the Third Battle of Winchester, saw most of his friends be killed in battle. Lord knows what he saw during the battle and the things that he had to do. And then he had to walk back. He was tired. He was hungry. He was probably traumatized with PTSD. So that leads us to, unfortunately, what my third great grandfather is famous for. So he is unfortunately famous for lynching the horse thief. So there were 7 men that helped Jeremiah, his brothers and some friends in the area, and they got together and they said, we're going to figure out who stole this horse. And some of the men that were part of this lynch mob, they also had horses stolen. So, this was a very... it was a time of strife, and it was a time of a lot of upset and desperation. So they got together and they found this horse thief, and it was a Confederate slave. So who knows if this man, was doing it because he wanted to steal these horses? Was he forced to steal these horses? He obviously wasn't a slave of his own volition. That was, an enslaved person. That's horrible. Who knows what this man had to endure, but here he was in York County stealing horses during the Civil War to aid the Confederates. And this was obviously a Union state. So they find him. And unfortunately, my third great grandfather, who's behind me, Jeremiah Miley Spahr, he's the one that pulled the trigger. And they killed this horse thief with his service rifle. And all 8 of them, they help each other hide the body. And they think they got away with it. And they did for a little while until the body was found. And everyone knew about this horse thief. Obviously, it had been happening for a while. Multiple horses had been stolen. They had warned the guy, get out of town. He obviously didn't, so all of a sudden when he goes missing and he's not stealing horses anymore, people are like, hey, did he just leave town on his own, or, what happened to him? So they find the body, and there's a grand jury inquest, and they charge Jeremiah Miley Spahr, they're gonna get him for murder. But here in York County at the time, unfortunately, they didn't view horse thievery as a minor issue. They viewed it as something that was worth killing someone over. Did he do it in the right way? No. I don't condone murder. I don't condone a lynch mob. I think slavery is absolutely horrible, but it was a different time, the 1800s, and they let him go. They let all of them go. None of them were punished. None of them served time for this crime. And, Jeremiah, he went on to live his life. He was married. He had children. He had a farm. He spent time in Newberry Township and Warrington Township. And that's how he, lived the remainder of his life. I'm not sure how old he is in this particular photograph, but you can tell he's an elderly gentleman at the time, and he lived a long life. And when he is buried and his obituary, it makes no mention of the fact that he had murdered someone, that he had formed a lynch mob, and that he was responsible for this crime. Cut to the 2000s, it was about 2021, 2022, I go to the Redland Community Library and I hear Scott Mingus, who is a renowned Civil War and York County history author. And he's giving a presentation, and it was about murder mysteries during the Civil War. And they said one of the mysteries was they knew who the murderer was, but they don't know the identity of the victim. They've never been able to discover who this horse thief was, who this Confederate slave was. And he said, some of you are probably related to the Spahrs. So I go home. I was taking care of my grandmother at the time. She was in hospice care, and I was taking care of her at her home. And even though her body was failing, her mind was still she was a wealth of knowledge. And I said, hey, do you think we're related to the Spahrs? And she was like, well, yeah, my grandparents were Spahrs. And she was like, they were grumpy and, we didn't really get along with them. They were kind of mean. But yeah, like Jeremiah. And I was like, oh my God, I think I'm related to them. So I'm a history buff, genealogy buff, and I go online, I go on Ancestry, do my family history. That's my third great grandfather right there. That's who Scott Mingus was talking about. So I go to the next presentation that Scott Mingus does, and I'm like, you're never going to believe this. I was one of the people that you said, hey, you could be related to this person. So he wrote a book, I think it's Murders and Marauders of York County, Pennsylvania. I'll have to put the link. But he wrote it. It's available on Amazon. It sold a ton of copies. It's an amazingly well-researched book. But it's about murders and crimes in York County history. Some of them, they know who the perpetrator is, not who the victim was. Some they know who the victim is, but not who committed the crime. Some of them are about unfortunately, people that are buried in unmarked graves. It's really interesting, and one of the stories is about Jeremiah and the lynch mob that got the horse thief. And it was shocking to me because everyone wants to be related to someone famous. A genealogist, you're like, oh, I want to be related to someone that came over on the Mayflower. I want to be related to royalty. Yeah, unfortunately, my family tree, it turns out I'm related to a Civil War veteran who is also a murderer from York County, Pennsylvania. But I'm not proud of that, and I'm sure he wasn't proud of what he did, but it doesn't mean the story shouldn't be told. And, it's been really interesting digging into my family history and finding these stories and figuring out, what is worth telling. And I just think this is a really compelling story. Scott Mingus tells it in his book. He really outlines the timeline and the crime, and it's been really interesting. I found a lot of articles on newspapers.com that dealt with this. And I'm a reenactor in the 87th Pennsylvania. That is the same regiment that my third great grandfather was in. So it really makes me feel more connected to his life and what he went through and the things that they were going through during the Civil War that caused someone, to go and take vigilante justice and commit murder, take punishment into their own hands and say, I'm not going to wait for a court of law to come get this person. I don't know if he ever got his horse back. I don't think he did. I think he lost the horse, but, he got away with murder. And that is crazy to me. And unfortunately, that is not the only murderer that I've found in my family tree. And it's not the only murderer named Jeremiah in my family tree. So I'm going to talk about that next. So stay tuned for the next Jeremiah, unfortunately, in my family tree that has committed murder. But, thank you for everyone that has watched this one. And if you want to learn more, if you go to my profile, I have links to my blog. I'm part of the 52 Ancestors in 52 Weeks challenge. And every week we research a new ancestor and write a blog about them. There's different themes. So each week there's a prompt, and it'll be someone that came from a different country, someone that's traveled to multiple states, someone that owned their own business, different things to get you looking for different ancestors for each week. So hopefully by the end of the year, I'll have researched 52 new ancestors, but the link to my blog is in my profile. So please check that out. But thanks, guys.